I never thought I'd find him like this, I whispered to myself, my voice almost lost in the echo of the empty mansion. The rain slashed against the tall windows, turning the abandoned halls into a blur of silver streaks and shadows. My shoes squeaked against the slick marble as I ran down the hallway, clutching the worn mop bucket I had grabbed from the cleaning closet, my arms aching, my heart hammering in my chest like a frantic drum. Every step sent a shiver through me, the chill from the storm outside mixing with the dampness that clung to the air. I had only come in to check the basement storage after hearing strange noises from the first floor, thinking maybe a stray animal had gotten in, but nothing had prepared me for what I was about to see. As I reached the old wooden door at the end of the corridor, the light from my small flashlight danced across the peeling wallpaper and the rusted handles of broken furniture. I could hear it again, a soft, uneven breathing that seemed too human to be anything else. My stomach twisted into knots as I pressed the door open slowly, the hinges groaning like a warning. There, in the faint glow of the flashlight, was a man sitting on the floor, his shoulders slumped, head bowed, and hands resting limply on his knees. His suit, once undoubtedly expensive, was dusty and wrinkled, his shoes scuffed and smeared with mud. The sight of him made my pulse race. This wasn't some prank or an intruder. He was real, and he looked trapped. "Hello," I called softly, stepping closer, my voice barely rising above the hum of the storm. The man lifted his head slowly, and my breath caught. His dark hair was damp, plastered against his forehead, and the piercing blue of his eyes met mine, cold and calculating. Yet there was a flicker of something unguarded there. He studied me with a measured intensity, as if weighing every decision I might make, every action I could take. My hands shook slightly as I dropped the mop bucket to the floor, the sound clattering against the concrete and echoing off the walls. Yet he didn't flinch, didn't move. You're not supposed to be here," he said finally, his voice deep, controlled, with an undertone that hinted at danger but not harm. I swallowed hard, nodding, forcing my feet to step closer despite the knot of fear tightening in my stomach. I heard noises. I managed my own voice trembling. "I just wanted to check, to see if—" My words faltered as my eyes took in the ropes loosely binding his wrists. His gaze softened for a brief second, a crack in the otherwise impervious wall of composure. "You shouldn't be here," he repeated, almost as a warning to himself, but I could hear the underlying desperation. My mind raced. Who would lock someone like this in a basement? And why? The thought of stepping back, running for the stairs, and escaping into the storm outside flashed through me, but something in his eyes rooted me to the spot. I couldn't leave. I bent down slowly, my fingers trembling as I reached for the knots around his wrists, and as I worked them loose, his shoulders sagged in relief, and a small sigh escaped his lips. The air in the basement felt heavier now, charged with unspoken tension, the hum of the storm outside mingling with the quiet gratitude that passed between us in the dim light. "Thank you," he said quietly, and for the first time, the chill in his tone gave way to something warmer, almost human. I stepped back, hands still shaking, and tried to find my words. Who did this to you?" He shook his head slightly, the barest curve of a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "That doesn't matter now. You found me, and that's what counts." My heart thudded painfully in my chest as I realized the gravity of the situation. This man, Ethan Blackwood, whoever he was, had been vulnerable in a way that no one in his world ever allowed. And by some twist of fate, I, Lily Harper, a mere maid in this vast, empty house, was the first person to see him like this. Outside, the rain continued its relentless patter, and I felt a strange mixture of fear and responsibility settle over me. I had a choice to make, a step forward into unknown danger or retreat into the safety of the night. But as I looked at Ethan, I knew, without a doubt, that I couldn't just leave him there. The weight of that decision pressed on my shoulders, mingling with adrenaline and the thrum of fear, and as I took another step toward him, his eyes met mine again, unwavering, and I realized that whatever had brought us together in this moment, it was only the beginning. The dim light from my flashlight trembled across the basement walls as Ethan pushed himself to his feet, his movements slow but deliberate, each step measured with caution. I stayed close, hands hovering near the ropes and the debris we had disturbed, my pulse racing not just from the adrenaline, but from the weight of the responsibility settling on my shoulders. He turned to face me fully now, and I could see the faint shadows of exhaustion under his eyes, the way his jaw tightened, as though holding himself together required more effort than standing on his own. "We need to get out of here," I whispered, almost to myself, and his gaze met mine with an intensity that made the air between us feel charged, taut with unspoken understanding. He nodded once, barely perceptible, and began scanning the basement, eyes sweeping over the cracked walls, the scattered boxes, the broken remnants of old furniture that littered the floor. "There is a back exit," he said quietly, voice calm but edged with focus, and I followed his direction, moving carefully, every creak of the wooden floorboards under my shoes amplified in the silence. My flashlight flickered as I passed over a narrow stairwell, the metal railing cold and damp beneath my hands, and I felt a shiver run down my spine, the mix of chill and anticipation making my skin prickly. Ethan led the way, fluid and precise, as though even in his weakened state his body remembered the discipline of control, the silent authority that radiated from him even when he did not speak. I could hear my own breathing, uneven and quick, echoing in the space, and I wondered briefly how someone like him could be so vulnerable and yet so commanding at the same time. A low hum of electricity from a nearby light bulb flickered overhead, casting uneven shadows that danced across the walls, and for a moment, our movements seemed synchronized, a silent pact forming between us, fragile but undeniable. As we reached the narrow doorway that led to a hidden service corridor, he paused, placing a firm but non-threatening hand near my shoulder, guiding me through without touching in a way that would make me feel trapped. I swallowed hard, eyes flicking to his, seeing a mixture of wariness and trust that made my stomach twist in unfamiliar ways. The corridor was tight, the air heavy with the scent of dust and damp wood, but each step took us closer to safety. I kept my flashlight steady, illuminating the path ahead, while Ethan moved with cautious grace, checking each corner, every turn, as though anticipating a threat before it could appear. My mind raced, thinking of what could have led to him being locked away, who might have done this, and why the powerful man before me had been reduced to a state of helplessness. And yet, there was no panic in him, no frantic desperation, only focus, measured and precise, and a quiet demand for calm that I felt in the back of my own mind, urging me to steady myself. We turned another corner, and the faint outline of a staircase leading upward became visible. The sound of rain from above filtered down, a soft backdrop to the tension that hummed between us. I could feel Ethan's eyes on me again, noting every shift, every tremor in my movements, and I forced myself to keep steady, matching the rhythm of his careful steps. As we ascended, the space widened slightly, the damp smell giving way to faint traces of wood polish and the distant scent of rain from the outside, and I realized the storm outside mirrored the storm within me, the mixture of fear, adrenaline, and something else I could not name. We reached the top step, and I held the door open for him, the pale light from the rainy evening spilling into the corridor. He paused, taking a deep breath, and for a brief moment, I saw the humanity behind the facade, the man behind the power and reputation, and it made me aware of the fragile trust that had begun to form. "Are you ready?" I asked, voice low, steadying myself against the fear that threatened to make me stumble backward. He nodded, eyes scanning the world beyond the basement, and then he moved past me, stepping into the rain-soaked hallway, the storm embracing us, cold and relentless, but somehow cleansing. I followed, each step careful, the wet tiles slicked beneath my shoes, and I realized that we were leaving more than a basement behind. We were stepping into the unknown, bound together by a moment of courage, discovery, and the unspoken promise that neither of us could yet name. The storm roared around us, but inside, there was a strange calm, a recognition that what began in darkness had shifted the balance of everything, and I could not help but feel that this night would change both our lives forever. The rain continued to drum against the windows as Ethan and I made our way through the mansion, the corridors stretching ahead like a labyrinth of shadows and secrets. My heart still pounded from the adrenaline of freeing him, and I could feel the tension in his movements as he led the way, careful not to draw attention to the faint light that escaped from the basement. Each step echoed softly on the polished floors, a reminder of the silence that had settled over the house for hours, broken only by the occasional distant rumble of thunder. I glanced at him, noticing the slight stiffness in his shoulders, the way he kept his eyes scanning the space, ever vigilant, and I realized that despite the calm in his voice, he had been navigating danger far longer than I had. The faint scent of rain mixed with the musk of the old mansion filled the air, and I drew a deep breath, trying to steady my own nerves as we approached the main stairwell. He gestured for me to pause, and I watched as he knelt briefly, examining the floor for any signs that someone had followed us or could enter unnoticed. His focus was precise, meticulous, and I felt a wave of awe mixed with unease. He was a man used to control, yet here, in this moment, he was reliant on my presence, however unintentional that reliance might be. I took a careful step forward, my shoes whispering against the wood, and he nodded, a silent signal to continue, and together we ascended the stairs, the tension between us growing with every quiet footfall. The hallways opened slightly, revealing glimpses of the storm outside through tall windows, the rain casting silver streaks across the darkened rooms, and I felt the cold air brush against my skin, a reminder of the world beyond the basement, dangerous and unpredictable, yet strangely alive. As we reached a small landing, he paused again, glancing at a side door that led to a balcony overlooking the garden, and for the first time, his expression softened just a fraction, a fleeting humanizing glimpse behind the layers of authority and caution. I followed his gaze, seeing the rain-slicked stones below and the twisting shapes of the shrubs, and felt the weight of the night settle over me, a mixture of relief and apprehension. "We are not safe yet," he murmured, and I nodded, understanding without questioning, knowing that the storm outside was nothing compared to the storm of secrets and power he carried with him. We continued, moving cautiously toward the rear exit, each step deliberate, synchronized in an unspoken rhythm that had formed between us, fragile but undeniable. The faint hum of electricity overhead flickered as we passed through another corridor, and I could sense the shift in the atmosphere, a subtle tension, as if the mansion itself was holding its breath, watching us, waiting for the next move. Ethan glanced at me briefly, his eyes a piercing blue in the dim light, and I felt the silent gravity of the connection that had begun to form, a mixture of trust, fear, and curiosity that neither of us could name yet. My hands were still trembling slightly from the adrenaline, but I forced myself to stay steady, matching his careful steps, letting the rhythm of his caution guide me. As we reached the back door, rain poured in through the cracks, drenching the threshold in silver threads of water, and I held it open for him, the light from the storm outside illuminating the outlines of his figure. He stepped forward, casting a long shadow behind him, and I felt the enormity of the moment, the fragile intersection of two lives brought together by circumstance, courage, and the unspoken acknowledgement that neither of us would be the same after this night. I followed, the cool rain washing over us as we stepped outside, the storm embracing us in a raw, cleansing embrace, and I knew in that instant that the night was only the beginning, that the journey we had stumbled into would unravel more than just the confines of a basement, and whatever lay ahead, we would face it together, bound by the trust forged in the darkest hours. The street outside was slick with rain, reflecting the pale glow of the street lamps like pools of liquid silver, and I felt the cold drip down my back as I followed Ethan carefully, his pace deliberate, eyes scanning the perimeter as if anticipating every movement in the shadows. The mansion behind us loomed dark and silent, its windows like watchful eyes, and each step we took across the wet pavement echoed softly, a rhythm in the quiet chaos of the storm. I kept my flashlight steady, illuminating the path ahead, catching glimpses of the ivy climbing the walls and the wrought iron fence that fenced the property, but I could feel Ethan's attention was divided, his presence commanding even in this moment of vulnerability. "We need to move quickly," he murmured, his voice low, controlled, yet carrying an edge of urgency that made my pulse quicken, and I nodded, matching his steps, feeling a strange mixture of fear and trust coil tight within me. The rain fell harder, drumming on our jackets and shoes, soaking through the thin layers, and the wind tugged at my hair, whipping it across my face, but I did not stop, keeping my eyes on the way forward, on Ethan, on the silent promise that we would reach safety together. As we turned down a narrow alley adjacent to the property, the soft splash of water beneath our feet mingled with the distant hum of traffic, a reminder that the world beyond the mansion continued, indifferent to the small, precarious drama unfolding here. Ethan paused briefly, his sharp gaze catching something beyond the alley, perhaps a shadow, perhaps nothing at all, and I felt a shiver run through me as he gestured for me to stay close. I adjusted the strap of my bag, gripping it tighter, aware of the weight it carried not just physically but emotionally. The sense of responsibility I had assumed the moment I found him. The alley opened onto a quieter street, lined with row houses whose lights glowed faintly, and the rain reflected like molten glass along the asphalt. Each step forward a careful negotiation between haste and caution. Ethan slowed, checking the corners and doorways, moving with a precision that reminded me of his unyielding control over situations that most would find overwhelming. Yet I could sense the fatigue in his movements, the subtle way he shifted his weight, a man accustomed to standing strong, but now relying on the unexpected ally beside him. Almost there, he whispered not, glancing back, but letting the words hang in the misty air, and I followed, pushing down the tremor in my hands, feeling the strange duality of fear and determination coursing through me. We reached a small, unassuming doorway at the side of a building, its paint peeling, handle slick with rain, and Ethan moved to open it, glancing at me for confirmation before he stepped through. The inside was dim but dry, the faint smell of aged wood and rain-scented air welcoming, and I felt a rush of relief wash over me as the walls enclosed us, the storm outside now a muffled roar. Ethan exhaled quietly, running a hand over his damp hair. I still alert, and I realized in that instant that despite everything, he had begun to trust my presence, even if only slightly. I stepped fully inside, closing the door behind us, the lock clicking softly, and for the first time since the basement, there was a shared quiet, a pause in the storm, a fleeting moment of calm that allowed the weight of the night to settle. My shoulders ached, my mind whirling with questions about what had led him here, who had placed him in that basement, and the broader implications of the life he carried with him. Yet in this stillness, I sensed the beginning of a fragile understanding forming between us. Ethan glanced at me, a faint shadow of a smile, acknowledging the courage it had taken to come after him, and I realized that our journey was far from over, that the night had only shifted the stage, setting in motion a series of events that would test our trust, our wits, and perhaps even our hearts. The storm outside continued unabated, but inside, there was a tenuous warmth, a silent acknowledgement that in finding him, I had become part of a story larger than myself, and whatever awaited us, we would face it side by side. The air inside the safe room was thick with the scent of damp wood and the faint aroma of rain seeping in from the outside, and I could hear the distant hum of the storm as it continued to lash against the windows. Ethan stood near the far wall, his posture rigid yet somehow relaxed, eyes scanning the dimly lit space as though measuring every shadow, every potential threat, and I felt the weight of his focus pressing gently against my awareness. My hands were still trembling slightly from the adrenaline of the escape, and I gripped the strap of my bag tightly, feeling the leather bite into my fingers, reminding me that I was not just a passive observer in this unfolding moment, but a participant whose choices mattered. I took a careful step forward, and Ethan's gaze flicked to me, piercing and unwavering, and for a moment, the quiet in the room was almost tangible, like we were suspended in the eye of a storm, removed from the chaos outside. "You did not need to risk yourself," he said, his voice low and controlled, the authority in his tone unmistakable. Yet there was a softness underneath that I had not expected, a human acknowledgement that sent a shiver down my spine. I shook my head slightly, forcing my voice to remain steady despite the thrum of my pulse. "I could not just leave you there." His eyes held mine, assessing, weighing, and for the first time, I felt that there was no barrier between his gaze and my own, a silent connection that communicated more than words could. The faint light from a single overhead bulb flickered, casting elongated shadows that stretched across the room, and I realized that in the stillness, each movement was amplified, each sound a note in the symphony of tension and relief that had settled over us. Ethan moved toward a small table, brushing dust off the surface with deliberate care, his fingers precise, almost meticulous, and I watched the subtle shift in his expression as he exhaled slowly, a silent acknowledgement that the immediate danger had passed, and yet the undercurrent of caution remained, threading through every gesture, every glance. I stepped closer, unsure of what to say, and found that words were inadequate for the intensity of the moment. Instead, I let my actions speak, helping to rearrange a chair that had toppled during our hurried exit, placing it back with a soft scrape against the floor that seemed deafening in the quiet. Ethan's eyes followed each motion, not with impatience, but with careful observation, and I felt the weight of his attention, a reminder that our roles had shifted, that I was no longer merely a maid in this house, but someone whose presence mattered, whose courage had altered the course of events. Outside, the storm continued unabated, rain pelting the side of the building in a relentless rhythm, and the wind whispered through the cracks of the windows, a soft reminder that the world beyond was indifferent, chaotic, and yet we had carved out a fragile pocket of safety here, together. Ethan finally turned to face me fully, the faintest crease in his brow softening, and for the first time, I saw a trace of vulnerability that he allowed only in my presence. "You should not have come after me," he murmured, not as a rebuke, but as a recognition of the risk I had taken, and I met his gaze steadily. I could not ignore it. I could not leave you there alone. The words hung between us, simple, yet heavy with meaning, and I realized that our understanding had shifted in these moments, from strangers caught in circumstance to allies bound by courage and necessity. I moved toward the small window at the far side, peering through the rain-streaked glass at the shadowed garden below, the silver reflections of the storm casting a surreal glow, and felt the gravity of the night settle over me, a mixture of awe, tension, and an unexpected sense of connection. Ethan came to stand beside me, his presence close, steady, reassuring, and I sensed the unspoken agreement forming between us, that whatever challenges lay ahead, the choices we made together tonight had set the tone for everything to come. The room was silent except for the distant drumming of the storm. Yet in that silence, there was a pulse, a rhythm of possibility, a quiet understanding that our paths had converged in a way that neither of us could have anticipated, and that the night, with all its shadows and rain, had irrevocably changed the course of both our lives. The storm had begun to soften, the rain now a gentle patter against the windows, and the streets outside shimmered with reflections of the fading lightning, casting the garden and mansion in a surreal, muted glow. Ethan moved with measured steps toward the interior of the safe room, his eyes scanning each corner, every shadow, as though expecting the unexpected, and I followed close behind, each footstep careful, deliberate, mirroring the rhythm he set. My fingers itched to reach for the small pack I carried, checking the contents silently, a habit born from years of cautious responsibility, and I realized that the weight of the night pressed down on me, not just from the storm outside, but from the magnitude of what had transpired in the basement and the streets beyond. He paused near a set of tall shelves, the faint light catching the silver of his watch, and I noticed the way he breathed, steady but purposeful, each inhale deliberate, a subtle reminder that even in moments of relief, the vigilance of a man accustomed to control never fully rested. "We need to plan," he said quietly, his tone calm, but edged with that familiar authority, and I nodded, feeling the gravity of his words settle over me like a tangible presence. I moved toward a small table, setting my flashlight down and taking a deep breath, letting my shoulders drop slightly, while remaining alert to the environment, aware that despite the temporary calm, the night held more uncertainties than I could yet see. Ethan leaned against the edge of the table, hands folded lightly, eyes fixed on mine with a focus that felt both assessing and appreciative, a silent recognition of the courage it had taken to follow him into danger. I shifted slightly, feeling the tension in my muscles ease for the first time since the basement, yet I remained keenly aware of the delicate balance of safety and risk that hung between us, a fragile thread connecting our movements, our breaths, our awareness. The faint hum of the storm outside merged with the occasional drip from the roof, creating a steady rhythm that underlined the quiet tension, and I found myself synchronizing my breathing to it, an unconscious attempt to steady my nerves as I processed the sequence of events that had brought us here. "Do you understand what this means?" he asked, voice low, deliberate, and I realized that he did not only mean the immediate danger, but the implications of our encounter, the unspoken consequences that stretched beyond the mansion walls into the wider world that his presence invariably touched. I nodded, choosing my words carefully. "I understand. We need to be cautious, but we are safe here for now." His gaze lingered on mine, unflinching, and I felt a strange mixture of reassurance and anticipation, as if the night itself held its breath, waiting to see what we would do next. We moved together toward a corner of the room where a small window overlooked the quiet street below, the reflections of the wet pavement shimmering faintly in the dim light, and I felt the subtle shift of perspective, the realization that our survival depended not just on physical presence, but on attention, awareness, and the choices we made in tandem. Ethan opened the window slightly, letting in a rush of fresh, rain-scented air, and I breathed it in, the coolness grounding me, reminding me of the world beyond the mansion and the stakes that lingered there. We stood side by side, silent for a moment, absorbing the calm after the chaos. And in that quiet, I sensed the unspoken trust that had begun to grow, a bond forged in the immediacy of crisis, and I knew that whatever awaited us in the hours to come, this night had irrevocably altered the course of both our lives. Outside, the storm eased further, but the memory of its intensity remained, a backdrop to the awareness that safety was never permanent, and vigilance, courage, and subtle collaboration would be our companions in the unfolding journey. Ethan turned to me then, eyes reflecting a faint glint of something softer, more human, and I felt a tentative warmth, the recognition that our connection, formed in moments of urgency and choice, had a momentum that neither of us could yet name, but both of us felt with undeniable clarity. We moved to the interior of the room, preparing to make a plan, aware that the night was far from over, yet certain that our combined presence created a measure of security and a shared resolve that would carry us forward. The room had grown quieter, the faint hum of the storm outside reduced to soft taps against the window panes, and I could feel the weight of the night pressing gently on us, a shared tension that neither of us had spoken aloud, but both of us understood. Ethan moved to a corner, retrieving a small notepad and a pen, his movements deliberate, precise, and I watched, fascinated by the care he took even in such a simple act, a man accustomed to control in every aspect of his life, yet now operating within the fragile context of trust and gratitude. I perched on the edge of a chair nearby, hands folded in my lap, trying to calm the racing thoughts that bounced through my mind. Who had put him there? Why? And what consequences awaited beyond these walls? The air smelled faintly of damp wood and rain, comforting in its consistency, and I could hear the soft click of the pen against the paper as Ethan wrote, the sound grounding in its rhythm. "We have a narrow window," he said finally, lifting his gaze to meet mine, the blue of his eyes sharp and focused, yet there was a softness there that I had not seen before, an acknowledgement of the effort I had taken to find him, to follow him through the storm, and to help him. I nodded slowly, feeling a strange sense of pride mixed with apprehension, knowing that my choices had drawn me into a world far beyond anything I had known, yet I could not regret them. The pull of responsibility and the subtle recognition of courage had tethered me to him. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the window, and the faint scent of wet earth drifted in, mingling with the cool air, and I felt it stir something inside me, a heightened awareness of the world beyond the safe room, a reminder that the calm was temporary, that vigilance and strategy were still required. Ethan set down the pen and leaned against the edge of the table, folding his arms loosely, and I noticed the subtle shift in his posture, a relaxation that spoke of trust, the first in hours, and I felt a corresponding ease in myself, though it was tinged with the knowledge that the night held more challenges yet to unfold. I spoke quietly, choosing my words with care. "What will we do next? We cannot stay here forever." He nodded, his gaze sweeping the room, calculating, considering. "We need to assess the house and the surrounding area. There may be others who know he was here, and we must ensure our safety before moving." I followed his lead, standing and walking toward the window, peering through the rain-streaked glass at the shadowed streets below, the reflections of the storm creating shifting patterns of light and dark, and I realized how heightened my senses had become, every sound, every movement, every flicker of light pulling my attention. Ethan approached quietly, and I felt the presence of his vigilance behind me, protective but non-intrusive, and the knowledge that he was relying on me, as much as I was on him. We began to make a plan, silently, carefully, speaking in low tones that barely disturbed the fragile calm of the room, mapping out steps and contingencies, aware that every detail mattered, that the smallest oversight could unravel the delicate balance we had established. As we spoke, I noticed the way he watched me, not critically but attentively, and I felt the weight of his consideration, a recognition of my role in the events of the night, a silent respect born of circumstance and courage. Outside, the storm had lessened, but the streets remained slick and reflective, a mirror of the uncertainty and possibilities that lay ahead, and I felt a mixture of apprehension and determination settle over me. We moved toward the doorway leading to the inner hall, gathering supplies and checking our surroundings, each action deliberate, synchronized, a quiet partnership emerging from the chaos. I realized that in the shared attention, the careful planning, the mutual reliance, a fragile bond had formed, one that was rooted not in familiarity but in the immediacy of need, trust, and courage, and I knew that the night had shifted something fundamental between us. Ethan glanced at me, a faint trace of approval in his expression, and I returned it with a tentative smile, the first small sign of connection that had nothing to do with circumstance or danger, yet was entirely shaped by both. We moved as one toward the next stage of the night, each step calculated, each breath measured, aware that what awaited us beyond the safe room required clarity, patience, and the kind of quiet courage that had already brought us this far. The morning light seeped through the partially drawn curtains, soft and diffused, casting a gentle glow across the safe room, and I could feel the tension from the night slowly easing into a quiet vigilance. Ethan stood near the window, his hands resting lightly on the sill as he surveyed the street below, eyes sharp, calculating every detail, noting the subtle movements of people and vehicles even in the calm after the storm. I sat on the edge of a chair, legs crossed, fingers drumming lightly against the armrest, mind still spinning from the events of the previous hours, trying to piece together a sense of what had transpired and what needed to happen next. The rain had stopped completely now, leaving the street glistening like glass, reflecting the muted gold of the street lamps, and the air carried the faint scent of wet asphalt and greenery from the gardens surrounding the mansion. Ethan turned toward me then, his expression unreadable, but the sharp blue of his eyes softened by a flicker of acknowledgement, a silent recognition that the night had tested us both in ways that words could not capture. I spoke carefully, my voice low, steady. We cannot stay here much longer. Someone may come looking for you, even after the storm. He nodded, folding his arms loosely, the movement precise, deliberate, yet I sensed the unspoken trust in his gesture, a subtle invitation for me to take part in the planning and the cautious steps ahead. I stood and approached the table where he had placed the notepad from the previous night, opening it and scanning the sparse notes, symbols, and careful markings he had made, each one deliberate, methodical, a reflection of the way he observed and controlled his environment. We will need to move in stages, he said, voice calm but commanding. First to secure our immediate safety, then to ensure that no one can anticipate our next steps. I nodded, tracing the lines on the paper, understanding the depth of strategy involved, and feeling the weight of responsibility settle over me, not as a burden, but as an anchor that focused my energy. The faint hum of electricity mixed with the occasional creak of the building as it settled in the cool morning air, a reminder that the world outside was still moving, indifferent to the quiet calculations inside. I could feel Ethan's presence behind me, steady, unwavering, a silent assurance that though the stakes were high, we were aligned, moving with purpose and attention, each decision deliberate, each step measured. We moved toward the door that led to the inner hall, and I felt a subtle tightening in my chest, the anticipation of what might be waiting, the unknown challenges that the day could bring, tempered by the clarity that we were not alone in facing them. Ethan glanced at me again, a subtle tilt of the head, a signal that he trusted my judgment, and I felt a corresponding confidence, the understanding that our combined awareness, our shared vigilance, had created a fragile but significant advantage. I checked the flashlight and supplies we had gathered, ensuring everything was ready, knowing that even the smallest oversight could compromise the careful balance we had established. Outside, the world was calm compared to the storm that had raged, but the reflection of wet streets and the shimmering light reminded me that appearances could be deceiving, that caution was still required, and that the events of the night had shifted the dynamics in ways that demanded attention. We moved silently through the room, speaking in low tones only when necessary, our actions synchronized, a quiet rhythm emerging, each aware of the other's movements, each contributing to a growing sense of control and preparedness. I noticed the subtle way Ethan observed, scanning, assessing, yet never overbearing, allowing me to act with confidence while providing guidance with precision, and I realized that in this careful balance, a new understanding had formed, a partnership forged not by familiarity, but by circumstance, courage, and mutual reliance. The faint morning light strengthened, filtering through the windows, and I felt a tentative sense of clarity, the recognition that while uncertainty remained, the choices we made together had already begun to define the course of our day, our next steps, and the trust that had quietly emerged between us. We paused near the doorway, preparing to move, each aware of the other's focus, each aligned in purpose, and I felt the weight of the night transform into resolve, a steady pulse of confidence that we would navigate what came next with attentiveness, precision, and an unspoken bond that had grown stronger through shared vigilance and courage. The morning had fully brightened the sky now, the storm clouds breaking into scattered streams of sunlight that dappled the mansion grounds in warm gold, and I could hear the soft rustle of leaves as the wind carried a fresh scent of rain-soaked earth through the open window. Ethan and I stood side by side near the doorway, eyes surveying the street beyond, watching as life continued with an ordinary rhythm that contrasted sharply with the extraordinary night we had just endured. The mansion behind us was quiet, still holding the echoes of the storm and the secrets of the basement, yet the calm allowed a space for reflection, a brief moment where the weight of the night could settle into a manageable tension. I shifted slightly, feeling the pull of adrenaline still lingering in my limbs, and realized that the trust we had built over the hours had transformed something intangible between us, a silent bond forged in necessity, courage, and careful attention. Ethan turned his gaze toward me, the piercing blue of his eyes softened by a flicker of something almost imperceptibly human, a recognition of my presence, my choices, and the role I had played in shifting the balance of a night that could have gone very differently. "We have accomplished what we came here to do," he said quietly, his voice steady, measured, yet carrying a warmth that I had not heard before, subtle but unmistakable. I nodded, understanding that our success was not just in escaping immediate danger, but in navigating the situation with caution, insight, and an unspoken cooperation that had grown between us. The mansion around us seemed to exhale, the faint creak of settling floors and the whisper of wind through cracks in the window framing the silence, a contrast to the tension that had defined the hours before. I adjusted my grip on the strap of my bag, feeling the weight of supplies and the awareness of preparedness, a tactile reminder of the steps we had taken and the decisions that had carried us to this point. Ethan moved toward a chair, sitting with a deliberate calm, the movement precise, and I could see the subtle relaxation in his shoulders, the shift from vigilance to a momentary ease, yet his eyes never fully lost their watchfulness, scanning the room and the faint outlines beyond the windows as if he knew that caution remained essential. I remained standing near the window, gazing out at the street where morning had brought an ordinary quiet, yet the reflections of sunlight on wet pavement reminded me that the world was never static, and that our vigilance and planning needed to continue. He gestured for me to sit, and I took the chair beside him, feeling the proximity, the shared space, the silent acknowledgement that we had both endured and adapted, that we had relied on one another in ways neither of us had anticipated. The light from the morning deepened, catching highlights in Ethan's hair, the edge of his jawline, and I felt a quiet pull of respect and awareness, The understanding that our encounter had not only altered the trajectory of the night, but the connection between us, subtle, silent, but undeniably present. Outside, the world was calm, birds beginning to stir, leaves shifting in the gentle breeze. Yet I could not ignore the underlying current that remained from the storm. The sense that challenges still lay ahead, and that the choices made in the night had created a new landscape of consequence. Ethan glanced toward me again, and I saw the calculation in his eyes, the careful consideration, and yet beneath it, a trace of gratitude, a recognition of courage and presence that I had offered without expectation. I exhaled slowly, feeling the tension of the past hours ease slightly, replaced by a focus on the next steps, the careful attention and awareness that would carry us forward, knowing that the bond formed in crisis had set a foundation of trust and understanding that would guide us through whatever remained. Together, we rose, preparing to move toward the next stage of our day, aware of the lingering challenges, yet confident in the careful, deliberate rhythm we had established, each step measured, each glance meaningful, and in that shared awareness, a quiet acknowledgement that the night, with all its shadows and uncertainty, had irrevocably changed the path for both of us, forging a connection that neither circumstance nor time could easily undo.